Hi, welcome everyone, I'm Kramer, and at the end of this video, you will be an expert at the useRef hook. Here's a quick overview of what I'll be discussing in the video. Okay, so what is useRef? useRef is a racked hook that lets you reference a mutable object. The object allows us to access the same value between renders. Whenever this value is changed, unlike useState, there is no re-render. This is quite useful in times where we don't want to re-render the entire component when changing a value, typically for data that doesn't affect the UI. We can also use the useRef hook to store a reference to any component we can later manipulate or perform a method on the stored component. Example, calling focus on a text input box. Okay, so let's take a look at the useRef hook. To use useRef, first make sure to import useRef. We create a ref by calling the useRef hook and passing an initial value. Here, I pass the initial value of 5. The useRef hook returns an object with one property, current. Here we can see my initial value 5 is now stored in the current property of this object. So yes, useRef returns us an object with one property, current. This object allows us to access the same current value between renders without re-rendering the component. Each time useRef is called across multiple renders, the same ref object is returned. How we access the value of the object is by using the current property. So here we access the value using .current. You can also see the use effect, which is also returning .current to console log the value. Changing the value is quite simple. We use .current and set the value using the equal sign. So when do we want to use useRef to store a mutable value? We can use it when the information we would like to store has no effect on the UI of our component. If it does have an effect on our UI, we typically want to use useState because updating the useState will trigger a re-render, making our changes visible. We can also use useRef if we want to store a value between renders without triggering a re-render when we update the value. So an example of this is storing a value to track how many times our component has re-rendered. You wouldn't want to use useState to track the renders, as useState itself causes a render. That would get you stuck in an infinite cycle of rendering. So here's an app that I made for a band called the Omaha Court, and yeah, they are a great band if you want to check them out. We have this band page with information about each band member. On this particular page, it was requested to add a feature where if I clicked on the band member 5 times, the secret GIF would play. So click here 5 times. And yep, a weird GIF and a distorted sound from one of their track players. So for this feature, I use useRef to track the clicks of the image. The reason why is that my image clicks don't need to trigger a re-render of the component. So here's the code. I have created a useRef here called clicksRef. The initial value here is 0, meaning that we start at 0 clicks. Down here is my image that is wrapped with touchable opacity. When this is clicked, my handle click method is called. This is my handle click method. And what this will do is clicksRef.current, increment it by 1, and then we check if clicksRef.current equals our Easter egg clicks, which is a constant that I have at the top, which is set to 5. So if it is equal to 5, we call this useStateSetter, set show Easter egg to true, and this changes our state, which will cause a re-render of our entire component. So the reason why I use a useRef hook here is because when my image is clicked, I do not need to re-render the component. My UI stays the same between clicks, and it is only on the 5th click that I need to re-render and display the GIF. If I was tracking my clicks with useState, every time I click on the button, my entire component would re-render. If your UI is not changing, there is mostly no point to re-render the component. Now this is only a basic example. At most I'm saving 4 or 5 renders here, but you can imagine in a bigger app with many trial components, this would save a bit of processing. So to show you visually, I'll add a useEffect hook here and I'll print out every render so we can see how many times this component is rendered. Okay, so I've just started the app, and what's going to happen is our useEffect will console.log I have re-rendered every time our Jono screen component re-renders. So let's take a look at the app. I'm going to go down to the Jono screen, band. Okay, so our Jono screen just opened for the first time, so it's rendered once, and we can have a look in our terminal, and we can see our initial render has logged. I have rendered. If I go back to the Jono screen, and I'm going to click on the Jono image, which is this guy. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've clicked Jono 4 times, and we can see we have not re-rendered. We've only rendered once in that initial first render. So I'm going to click him the 5th time, which should trigger our set show Easter egg state update and play the GIF. Okay, so if we look in the terminal, we can see that we now have I have re-rendered because we have changed the state, which has re-rendered our component. So now if I go back, that should trigger another state change, setting show Easter egg to false. Okay, and it has. So we can see another I have re-rendered in the terminal. Okay, so hopefully you can see how useRef can save us from unnecessary re-renders. Okay, so now that we have seen an example, I just want to talk about what not to do with useRefs. React is all about pure components, and what that means is that the same inputs should always have the same output. So the same props, state, and context should always return exactly the same JSX. Using refs in the wrong places can stop our components from being pure, because our refs persist between renders. If we allow our ref to modify our render, this could result in two different outputs, even if we use the same props and state. So to avoid this, we never read or write a ref during rendering. React's documentation recommends to only read or write refs from event handlers or effects. Okay, here's my code from before, and I just want to demonstrate what can go wrong if you do read refs from your render. Okay, so for my module visible condition, I'm currently using a state show Easter egg. Let's see what happens when I change this from state to a condition based off my reference. And I'll just remove any old state code. Okay, and I'll save that and we'll see what happens when I rerun the app. Okay, so I've just rerun the app and I'm going to start clicking on Jono. Okay, so we can now see that I'm way past 5 clicks, but my Easter egg hasn't appeared. So what is happening? So this part of the code still has never been executed. Nothing has triggered a re-render. So we have to remember that changing the ref does not trigger a re-render of the component. So although I have changed the value, it won't be reflected right away. It will only be updated once some other state or props has changed that triggers a re-render. Okay, so if I add a button here that triggers a state change, let's say onClick set state hello world, doesn't really matter, I just want any state for the purpose of triggering a render. So now that I've added a button that whenever pressed there is a state change, and because the state has changed, my component will re-render. Okay, so I've just rerun the app and it's just like before, but we have this update state button. And what I want to do is just reach 5 clicks on the Jono image. So 1, 2, okay, now we're at our 5th click, and if we remember that our module will become visible once this condition is true, where our clicks reaches 5. Okay, so we are at 5, and I'm just going to update the state by clicking the update state button, which will set state to hello world. So the set state, this triggers our re-render, and on that re-render, our condition is checked again, and it sees that we are on the 5th click at that time, and so it decides that it will show our module. Okay, yeah, so without the button, we couldn't see the module appear. All this button allows us to do is trigger the re-render, as we couldn't see the Easter egg before because although we were at 5 clicks, our component had not re-rendered, which is why it's bad to use these reference values within our rendering. I hope this explains why we shouldn't read or write a reference in our render, as we can never know when it will be executed or if it will be executed at all. Okay, so I built this project recently for a job application. The idea is an infinite scrolling image gallery. The images are fetched from the API per page. Every time you scroll towards the end of the list, a new page is loaded, which gives it the infinite scroll feeling. I used useRef here to keep track of the current page, using a ref called page number. Every time I scroll down further in the list, the page number gets incremented. The reason I used the useRef here is that the page number does not need to re-render the component. I only use the page number in my function to ensure I fetch the correct page from the API. The state update only happens once I add the newly fetched images to my current state, which will re-render these new images. If you want to take a look at this one, it's also available all the code on my GitHub. So if we have a look at the React Native paper library, which is my favorite React Native library, and what React Native paper is, it is a collection of custom components that are very nicely designed and you can easily use them in your application. I'm going to look at the Android checkpoint component, which uses 2 useRef values, one for the scale animation and one for tracking the first render. You will see ref used a lot for animations, as you need a mutable value to change over time. Ref is perfect to use here. The reason for checking the first render is that they want to avoid the animation on the first render. The checkbox does an animation when you check or uncheck the checkbox. It would look a little strange if this animation was playing whenever the screen or checkbox first rendered, so this ref is used to avoid it. So this is just something extra to be aware about. React saves the initial ref value once and ignores it on the following renders. I have this useRef here that for the initial value, an object is created of video player. So although the result of new video player is only used for the initial render, the function video player will still be called on every render. If we are creating expensive objects every render and not using them, this can be wasteful. So to solve this, we can instead initialize the ref like this. So first check if the ref is already initialized. If it is not, then we set the ref to the new object. Else we don't need to do anything as the ref has already been set and there is no need to recreate a new object. So this just saves us from recreating that object every render. Now the other use of useRef. We can also use useRef to have access to component instances. Each core component in React Native has a ref attribute. Through this ref attribute, we can pass our created useRef. Whenever our component first renders, our reference will be set to equal this component instance. Creating a useRef object. First again, make sure to import useRef. We create a ref by calling the useRef hook and passing an initial value. For component instances, we normally set the initial value to null. We then pass this to our component using the ref attribute. When our component is then first rendered, React will place the instance of our component into the current value of our reference. Here we can see a small example of what the ref object would look like. Okay, so here I just have an example. I've created a ref called input_ref, and I've just set the initial value to null. I later pass it to my text input component using the ref attribute. So when the text input component is first rendered, React will set the current value of my input ref to the instance of the component. And we'll be able to see what the value is from my use effect, which console logs the input rev. So we can see that here on the left side, my input rev has been consoled out, and we can see our current value now contains an object, which is our text input object. One of the most useful parts of having a reference to a component is being able to call a method on it. For each core component, we have a different set of methods available. These methods can be called from the .current value. So to focus on a text input reference, we call it .current.focus. So here's a table of a few different methods of different components. Each core component has different sets of methods that we can call. For more methods, you can find more on the React documentation. So if we take a look at the text input, we can call focus or blur. Focus will set focus to the text input component, meaning it's ready to type and accept input, whereas blur will unfocus. And scroll view, we can call the method scroll to scroll to a specific point in the scroll view, or call scroll to end to scroll to the end of the scroll view. You can also create your own methods using the use imperative handle hook, which is a bit more advanced, so I won't be talking about it here. So here's the code again, and I'm just going to demonstrate calling methods on a text input reference. So here I have two buttons, set focus and unfocus. And what set focus will do, on press, it will call the focus method of the input ref. So input ref.current.focus, and what this will do is set focus to the text input box. And unfocus will call the blur method, which will unfocus the text input box. Okay, so I'll just demonstrate that on the app. So set focus, my text input box is now focused, and unfocus does the opposite. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was able to help you understand useRefs. Please like and give me a sub. If you also have any suggestions or problems in React Native, please leave a comment and I can try to make a video about it. See you next time.